bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. I just like that music. I may come up with new music another week or month or so, depending on when I get things done. If I get things done. If I feel like getting things done. Anyway, let's see. Am I heard well enough? I do sound a little tinny still. I don't know what's up with that. What? Why are we doing ads again? Did the ads already hit? Really? Well, damn it. Go back to it. Go back to the music. See you in a bit. Okay, now I hope the ads really are over. it did 6 minutes of ads to me again. It's like it gave me the 1 minute as soon as the stream started, then it went into 3 minutes of ads. I switched back after the 3 minutes of ads, then it turns around and gives me more ads. What the hell? You shouldn't have to do 6 minutes of ads at the beginning. That's why I've been starting earlier, just to get the stinking ads out of the way. My mouth tracking's still a little off. That's weird. Anyway, I mentioned it before I decided to go back to the ads that I may be trying to do some updates around the stream next month or so. I've been working on it a lot because I've been complaining about working about it a lot on the Discord server. Damn, I need a new chair. I don't have the money for that yet. Unless I blow it on a credit card. But welcome in, Taka. Congrats on getting first. We are doing more Rivals of Sherlock Holmes tonight. I need to see if I can get a mic on here so I can filter it. Yes, existing microphone. Yes. Now I need to go to filters. See if I can get that better version of noise suppression on there. I don't know. Ooh, there's an equalizer. That's nice. Let's see. You need to cut out the high. Maybe. Because my voice doesn't. Well, no. I'm going to be doing voices. I don't need to cut out any other ranges. Okay, just get rid of the equalizer. Yes. I don't know how I can get rid of this tinny sound. Don't know if I'm getting the compressor. This is one of the things I never really got to learn when I was doing the radio TV stuff because, we had regular mixing boards and none of this stuff was actually on the ones I was using. Because I would really love to make some use of my radio TV degree because, I spent the years getting it. But I never thought I'd end up as an animated wolf. Though it was kind of a goal, but how that goes. Do I not have any backgrounds? Oh, it's just turned down. That's a new background music for this one too. Of course, now I'm thinking about getting another cheap monitor so I can just do the studio mode. Because that would really get me back into my TV training. Because I'm used to setting things before I get to it. Hey, a Star U. Nice. Do that on caps. Okay. But yeah, it is Thursday, so we are going to do some Rivals of Sherlock Holmes. And again, I will be doing new sets and everything else eventually, because I spent a lot of time updating the bookstore's look. I'm not showing it here because I still had to do some more editing. And I may bring in a few other features like cat cam, though. There's not a beastie on the bed at the moment. But I'll have that in my future streams. I may make it a redeem. But anyway, let's go ahead and get over the study. Yay, everything's in the right spot. Let me make sure my fireplace isn't on ads, because it says it's on a 10 hours, no ads, so I shouldn't have any ads popping up. I don't know if you can hear the fire or not. I'm waiting a bit. That's temperatures to rise tomorrow. Hold on. Okay, it's 33 right now. Tomorrow it's going to be in the 60s. Nice. Saturday, 69. Dun, 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 dun. I don't have an. Okay, just have the fireplace going. Okay. But yes, I will be updating this scene too. I've already got it designed, I just haven't figured out where I'm going to put everything on it yet. I haven't figured out how I'm going to put the cat cam on the study one yet, though. And I'm about to get a raid, so I'm going to get ready to shout him out real quick. Okay. There I am. Oh, it didn't auto shout out. Nice. I still have that weird call out message. Hey, Squall. Welcome in. Okay, Rod. Go sleep. Stretch out, curl up by the fire, and snore. I don't know if snakes snore or not. I don't think they would. All right. Definitely got to curl up by the fire, though. Funny, Kill beat me to the raid message. But yeah, we're doing more Rivals of Sherlock Holmes tonight. And I'm want to get like a third little monitor or something so I can have OBS in studio mode, though. I guess I could always fork out another $50 and get another cheap monitor. But yeah. Let's see what stories are. Oh, that's why we're doing it, because we had a pair of stories last week that were done by the same person. This one looks like it might be another series of. Yep, two more stories that are done by the same author. I always like it when it's the same one because you can pick up their style a lot easier. And hopefully my hand won't fall asleep tonight like it did last week. That was embarrassing. Kept losing pages. But our stories tonight from A Prince of Swindlers by Guy Boothby. Story 1. The Duchess of Wiltshire's Diamonds. To the reflective mind, the rapidity with which the inhabitants of the world's greatest city seize upon a new name or idea and familiarize themselves with it can scarcely prove otherwise than astonishing. As an illustration of my meaning, let me take the case of Plimo, the now famous private detective who has won for himself the rights to be considered as great as Lecoq, or even the late lamented Sherlock Holmes. Up to a certain morning, London had never heard his name, nor had it the remotest notion of who or what he might be. It was as sublimely ignorant and careless of the subject of the inhabitants of Kamchatka or Peru. Within 24 hours, however, the whole aspect of the case was changed. The man, woman, or child who had not seen his posters or heard his name was counted an ignoramus unworthy of intercourse with human beings. Princes became familiar with it as their trains bore them to Windsor, to luncheon with the Queen. The nobility noticed and commented upon it as they drove about the town. Merchants and businessmen generally read it as they made their way on the omnibus or the underground, to name their various shops and counting houses. Street boys called each other by it as a nickname. Music hall artists introduced it into their patter, while it was even rumored that the stock exchange itself had paused in the full flood tide of business to manufacture a riddle on the subject. That Climo made his profession pay him well was certain, for from the first fart of his advertisements must have cost a good round sum. Oh, old books in their print. Let me try that again. From the first fact that his advertisements must have cost a good round sum, and second because he had taken a mansion in Belverton Street, Park Lane, next door to the Porchester House, where, to be the dismay of the aristocratic neighborhood, he advertised that he was prepared to receive and consult by his clients. The invitation was responded to with alacrity, and from that day forward, between the hours of 12 and 2, the pavement upon the north side of the street was lined with carriages, every one containing some person desirous of testing the great man's skill. Yeah, that said the fart from the fact. The bottom part of the C in the type is missing. I must here explain that I have narrated all of this in order to show the state of affairs existing in Belverton Street and Park Lane when Simon Carne arrived, or was supposed to arrive, in England. If my memory serves me correctly, it was on a Wednesday, the 3rd of May, that the Earl of Amberley drove to Victoria to meet and welcome the man whose acquaintance he had made in India under such peculiar circumstances, and under the spell of whose fascination he and his family had fallen so completely. Reaching the station, his lordship descended from the carriage and made his way to the platform set apart for the reception of the Continental Express. He walked with a jaunty air and seemed to be on the best of terms with himself and the world in general. How little he suspected the existence of the noose into which he was so innocently running his head into. As if out of compliment to his arrival, the train put on an appearance within a few moments of reaching the platform. He immediately placed himself in such a position that he could make sure that seeing the man he wanted, and waited patiently until he should come into sight. Carne, however, was not among the first batch. Indeed, the majority of the passengers had passed before his lordship had caught sight of him. One thing was certain, however, the great crush might have been, it would figure to have been difficult to mistake Carne's figure. The man's infirmity and his peculiar beauty of the face rendered him easily recognizable. Possibly, after his long sojourn in India, he found the morning cold, for he wore a long fur coat, the collar of which he had turned up around his ears, thus making a fitting frame for his delicate face. On seeing Lord Amberley, he hastened forward to greet him. "Oh, this is most kind and friendly of you," he said as he took the other by the hand. "A fine day in Lord Amberley to meet me. One could scarcely imagine a better outcome." As he spoke, one of his Indian servants approached and salaamed before him. He gave him an order, and received an answer in Hindustani, whereupon he turned again to Lord Amberley. "You may imagine how anxious I am to see my new dwelling," he said. My servant tells me that my carriage is here, so I hope I may see that you will drive back with me, and see for yourself how I am likely to be lodged. I shall be delighted, said Lord Amberley, who was longing for the opportunity, and they accordingly went out to the station yard together to discover a brougham, brought by two magnificent horses, and with Nur Ali in all the glory of white raiment and crested turban on the box, waiting to reserve them. His lordship dismissed his Victoria, and when Jawar Sign had taken place beside his fellow servant upon the box, the carriage rolled out of the station yard in the direction of Hyde Park. I trust your ladyship as well, said Simon Carne politely, as they turned into Gloucester Place. Very well, thank you, replied the lordship. She bade me welcome you to England in her name as well as my own. I was to say that she is looking forward to seeing you. Oh, she is most kind, and I shall do myself the honour of calling upon her as soon as circumstances will permit, answered Carne. I beg you will convey me my best thanks to her for her thought of me. While these polite speeches were passing between them, they were rapidly approaching a large hoarding which was displayed a poster setting forth the name of the now famous detective Climo. Simon Carne, leaning forward, studied it, and when they had passed, turned to his friend again. Ah, Victoria, in all her hoardings we meet an enormous placard bearing the name Climo. Pray, what does it mean? His lordship laughed. You are asking a question which, a month ago, was on the lips of 9 out of 10 of every Londoner's. It is only within the last fortnight that we have learned who or what Climo is. And pray, what is he? Well, the explanation is very simple. He is neither more nor less than a remarkably astute private detective who has succeeded in attracting notice in such a way that half London has been induced to patronize him. I have had no dealings with the man myself, but a friend of mine, Lord Offington, has been a victim of a most audacious burglary. And the police having failed to solve the mystery, he is called Climo in. We shall therefore see what he can do before many days are past, but there, I expect you will soon know more about him than any of us. Indeed, and why? For the simple reason he has taken number 1 Belvington Street, the house adjoining your own, and sees his clients there. Simon Carne pursed his lips and appeared to be considering something. I trust you will not prove a nuisance, he said at last. The agents who found me the house should have acquainted me with the fact. Private detectives, on however large a scale, scarcely strike one as the most desirable of neighbors, particularly of a man who is so fond of quiet as myself. At this moment they were approaching their destination. As the carriage passed Belverton Street and pulled up, Lord Amberley pointed to a long line of vehicles standing before the detective's door. You can see for yourself something of the business he does, he said. Those are the carriages of his clients, and it is probable that twice as many have arrived on foot. I shall certainly speak to the agent on the subject, said Carne, with a shadow of annoyance upon his face. I consider the fact that this man's being so close to me a serious drawback to the house. Jawar Sign had descended from the box and opened the door in order that his master and his guest might alight, while the portly Ram Gafur, the butler, came down the steps, salaamed before the Oriental weakness. Carne greeted his domestics with a kindly condescension, and then, accompanied the ex-viceroy, entered his new abode. I think you may congratulate yourself upon having secured one of the most desirable residences in London, said his lordship 10 minutes later or so, when they had explored the principal rooms. I am very glad to hear you say so, said Carne. I trust your lordship will remember that you will always be welcome in my house as long as I am its owner. It is very kind of you to say, returned Lord Amberley warmly. I shall look forward to some months of pleasant intercourse. And now I must be going. Tomorrow, perhaps, if you have nothing better to do, you will give us the pleasure of your company at dinner. Your fame has already gone abroad, and we shall ask 1 or 2 nice people to meet you, including my brother and sister-in-law, Lord and Lady Gilpington.
Lord and Lady Offrington, and my cousin, the Duchess of Wiltshire, whose interest in China and the Indian art, as perhaps you know, is only second to your own. I shall be most glad to come. We may count on seeing you at Eaton Square, then at 8 o'clock. If I'm alive, you may be sure. I shall be there. Must you really go? Then goodbye, and many thanks for meeting me. His lordship left the house. Simon Carne went upstairs to his dressing room. His lordship, having left the house of Simon Carne, went upstairs to his dressing room, which was to be noticed he found without inquiry, and rang the electric bell beside the fireplace 3 times. While he was waiting for it to be answered, he stood looking out of the window at the long line of carriages in the street below. Everything is progressing admirably, he said to himself. Amberley does not suspect any more than the world in general. As I am proof, he asked me to dinner tomorrow evening to meet his brother and sister-in-law, 2 his particular friends, and above all, her Grace of Wiltshire. Of course I shall go, and when I bid her Grace good-bye, it will be strange if I am not one step nearer interest on Liz's money. At this moment the door opened, and his valet, the grave and respectable Belton, entered the room. Byrne turned to greet him impatiently. Come on, Belton, he said. We must be quick. It is 20 minutes to 12, and if you don't hurry, the folk next door will become impatient. Have you succeeded in doing what I spoke to you about last night? I have succeeded in everything, sir. I'm glad to hear it. Now lock that door and let us get to work. You can let me have your news while I'm undressing. Opening one side of the massive wardrobe that completely filled one end of the room, Belton took from it a number of garments. They included a well-worn velvet coat, a baggy pair of trousers, so old that only a notorious pauper or millionaire could have afforded to wear them, a flannel waistcoat, a Gladstone collar, a soft silk tie, and a pair of embroidered carpet slippers upon which no old clothes man, in the most reckless way of the business of Petticoat Lane, would have advanced a single halfpenny. Into these he assisted his master to change. Now, give me the wig and unfasten the straps of this hump, said Carne, as he placed garments just referred to upon the neighboring chair. Belton did as he was ordered, and then there happened a thing the like of which no one would have believed. Having unbuckled a strap on either shoulder and slipped his hand beneath his waistcoat, he withdrew a large papier-mâché hump, which he had carried away and carefully placed in the drawer of the bureau. Relieved of his burden, Simon Carne stood up straight and as well made as any of Her Majesty's dominions. The malformation, for which so many, including the Earl and Countess of Amberley, had often pitied him, was nothing but a hoax intended to produce the effect that would permit an additional facilities of disguise. The hump discarded, and the grey wig fitted carefully on his head in such a manner that not even a pinch of his own pearly locks could be seen beneath it. He adorned his cheeks with a pair of pipoo hair whiskers, donned the flannel vest and the velvet coat previously mentioned, slipped his feet into the carpet slippers, and placed a pair of smoked glasses upon his nose, and declared himself ready to proceed about his business. The man who would have known him for Simon Carne would have been as astute shall we say, as the private detective Climo himself. It's on the stroke of 12, he said, as he gave a final glance at himself in the piering glass above the dressing-room table, and arranged his tie to his satisfaction. Should anyone call, instruct Ramgaffer to tell them that I have gone out for business and shall not be back until 3 o'clock. Very good, sir. Undo the door and let me go in. Thus commanded, Belton went across the large wardrobe which, as I have already said, covered the whole of one side of the room, and opened the middle door. 2 or 3 garments were seen inside, suspended on pegs, and these he removed, at the same time pushing forward the right of the panel at the rear. When this was done, a large aperture in the wall between the 2 houses was disclosed, and through this door Carne passed, drawing it behind him. Number 1 Belverton Terrace, the house occupied by the detective whose presence in the street Carne seemed to find so objectionable, The entrance thus constructed was covered by a peculiar kind of confessional box in which Climo invariably sat to receive his clients, the rearmost panels of which opened in the same fashion as those to the wardrobe of his dressing room. These being pulled aside, he had but to draw them to again after him, take a seat, and ring the electric bell to inform his housekeeper that he was ready, and then welcome his clients as quickly as they cared to come. Punctually at 2 o'clock, the interviews ceased, and Climo, having repeated an excellent harvest of fees, returned to the processor house to become Simon Carne once again. Possibly it was due to the fact that the Earl and the Countess of Emberley were brimming over with praise. It may have been the rumor that he was worth as many millions as you have fingers upon your hand that did it. One thing, however, was self-evident. Within 24 hours of the noble Earl's meeting him at Victoria Station, Simon Carne was the talk, not only of fashionable, but also of unfashionable London. That his household were, with one exception, natives of India, that he had paid a rental for Proster House, which ran into 5 figures, that he was the greatest living authority upon China and Indian arts generally, and that he had come over to England in search of a wife, were among the smallest of the canards set afloat concerning him. During dinner next evening, Carne put forth every effort to please. He was placed on the right hand of his hostess next to the Duchess of Wiltshire. To the latter he paid particular attention, and to such good purpose that when the ladies returned to the drawing-room afterwards, her Grace was full of his praises. They had discussed china of all sorts. Carne had promised her a specimen which she had longed for all her life, but had never been able to obtain, and in return she had promised to show him the quaintly carved Indian casket in which the famous necklace, of which he had, of course, heard, spent most of its time. She would be wearing the jewels in question at her own ball in a week's time, she informed him, and if he would care to see the case when it came from the bankers on that day, she would be only too pleased to show it to him. As Simon Carne drove home in his luxurious brougham afterwards, he smiled to himself as he thought of the success which was attending his first endeavor. 2 of the guests, who were stewards of the Jockey Club, had heard with delight his idea of purchasing a horse in order to have an interest in the Derby, while another, on hearing that he desired to become a professor of the yachts, had offered to propose him for the RCYC. To crown it all, however, and much better than all, the Duchess of Wiltshire had promised to show him her famous diamonds. But this time next week, he said to himself, Liz's interest would be considerably closer. But satisfactory as my progress has been hitherto, it is difficult to see how I am to get possession of the stones. From what I have been able to discover, they are only brought from the bank on the day the Duchess intends to wear them, and they are taken back by his Grace the following morning. While she has got them in her person, it would be manifestly impossible to get them from her, and as, when she takes them off, they return to their box and placed in a safe, constructed in the wall of the bedroom adjoining, and which for the occasion is occupied by the butler and one of the under footmen, the only key in the possession of the Duke himself, it would be equally foolish to hope to appropriate them. In what manner, therefore, am I to become the possessor causes my comprehension. However, one thing is certain, obtained they must be, and the attempt must be made on the night of the ball, if possible. In the meantime, I will set my wits to work upon it. Next day, Simon Carne was the recipient of an invitation to the ball in question, and 2 days later he called upon the Duchess of Wiltshire at her residence in Belgrave Square with a plan prepared. He also took with him a small vase which he had promised her 4 nights before. She received him most graciously, and their talk fell at once to the usual channel. Having examined her collection and charmed her by means of 1 or 2 judicious criticisms, he asked permission to include photographs of certain of her treasures in his forthcoming book. Then, little by little, he skilfully guided the conversation on the subject of the jewels. Since we're discussing gems, Mr. Carne, she said, perhaps it would interest you to see my famous necklace. By good fortune, I have it in the house now, for the reason that an alteration is being made out of one of the clasps by the jewelers. I should like to see it immensely, answered Carne. At one time or another, I had had the good fortune to examine the jewels of the leading Indian princes, and I should like to be able to say that I had seen the famous Wiltshire necklace. Then you shall certainly have the honor, she answered with a smile. If you will ring the bell, I will send for it. Carne rang the bell as requested, and when the butler entered, he was given the key to the safe and ordered to bring the case to the drawing room. We must not keep it very long, she observed while the man was absent. It is to be returned to the bank in an hour's time. I am indeed fortunate, Carne replied, and turned to the description of some curious Indian wood carving, of which he was making a special feature in his book. As he explained, he had collected his illustrations from the doors of the Indian temples, from the gateways of palaces, from old brasswork, and even from the carved chairs and boxes he had picked up in all sorts of odd corners. Her Grace was most interested. How strange that you should have mentioned it, she said. If carved boxes are of any interest to you, it is possible my jewel case may be of some use to you. I think I told you during Lady Amberley's dinner it came from the Baron's, and was carved upon it the portraits of nearly every god in the Hindu pantheon. You raise my curiosity to a fever heat, said Carne. A few moments later the servant returned, bringing with him a wooden box about 16 inches long by 12 wide and 8 deep, which he placed upon the table beside his mistress, after which he retired. This is a case to which I have just been referring, said the Duchess, placing her hand on the article in question. If you glance at it, you will see how exquisitely it is carved. Concealing his eagerness with an effort, Simon Carne drew up his chair to the table and examined the box. It was with justice she had described the work of art. With the wood which was constructed, Carne was unable to tell. It was dark and heavy, and though it was not teak, it closely resembled it. It was literally covered with quaint carving, and of its kind was a unique work of art. It is most curious and beautiful, said Carne when he had finally finished examining it. In all my experience, I can say safely that I've never seen its equal. If you will permit me, I should very much like to include a description and illustration of it in my book. Of course you may do so. I shall only be too delighted, said her Grace. If it will help you in your work, I shall be glad to lend it to you for a few hours in order that you may have the illustration made. This was exactly what Carne had been waiting for, and he accepted the offer with alacrity. Very well, then, she said. On the day of my ball, when it will be brought from the bank again, I will take the necklace out and send you the case. I'll make one provision, however, that is that you must have it back to me the same day. I will certainly promise to do that, replied Carne. And now let us look inside, said his hostess. Choosing a key from a bunch she carried in her pocket, she unlocked the casket and lifted the lid. Accustomed as Carne had been all his life to the sight of gems, what he saw before him almost took his breath away. Inside the box, both sides and bottom, was quilted with softest Russian leather, and on this luxurious couch reposed the famous necklace. The fire of the stones when the light caught them was sufficient to dazzle the eyes, so fierce it was. As Carne could see, every gem was perfect of its kind, and there were no fewer than 300 of them. The setting was a fine example of a jeweler's art, and last but not least, the value of the whole affair was £50,000, a mere flea-bite to the man who had given it to his wife, but a fortune to any humble person. And now that you have seen my property, what do you think of it? Asked the Duchess as she watched her visitor's face. It is very beautiful, he answered, and I do not wonder that you are proud of it. Yes, the diamonds are very fine, and I think it's abiding their place that fascinates me. Have you any objection to my measuring it? Pray do so, if it is likely to be of any assistance to you, replied her grace. Carne then produced a small ivory rule and ran it over the box. The figures he thus obtained and jotted down in his pocketbook. 10 minutes later, when the case had been returned to the safe, he thanked the Duchess for her kindness and took his departure, promising to call in person for the empty case on the morning of the ball. Reaching home, he passed into the study and, seating himself on his writing table, pulled a sheet of paper towards him and began to sketch, as well as he could remember it, the box that he had seen. Then he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. I have cracked a good many hard nuts in my time, he said reflectively, but never one that seemed so difficult at first sight as this. As far as I see at present, the case stands as follows. The box will be brought to the bank where it usually reposes to Wiltshire House in the morning of the dance. I shall be allowed to have possession of it, without the stones, of course, for a period possibly extending from 11 o'clock in the morning to 4 or 5. At any rate, not later than 7 in the evening. After the ball, the necklace will be returned to it, when it will be locked up in the safe, over which the butler and the footman will mount guard. To get into the room during the night is not only too risky, but physically out of the question, while to rob her grace of her treasure during the progress of the dance would be equally impossible. The Duke fetches the casket and takes it back to the bank himself, so that, to all intents and purposes, I am almost as far from the solution as ever. Half an hour went by and found him still seated at his desk, staring at the drawing on the paper, and then an hour. The traffic in the streets rolled past the house unheeded. Finally, a sign announced his carriage, and, feeling that an idea might come to him with a change of scene, he set off for a drive in the park. By this time, his elegant mail phaeton, with his magnificent horses and Indian servants on the seat behind, was well known to Her Majesty's state equipage, and attracted almost as much attention. Today, however, the fashionable word noticed that Simon Carne looked preoccupied. He was still working out his problem, but so far without much success. Suddenly something, no one will ever be able to say what, put an idea into his head. The notion was no sooner born in his brain than he left the park and drove quickly home. 10 minutes had scarcely elapsed before he was back in his study again and ordering the Wajab Bashk should be sent to him. When the man he wanted put in an appearance, Carne handed him the paper upon which he had made the drawing of the jewel case. Look at that, he said, and tell me what thou seest there. I see a box, answered the man, who by this time was very well accustomed to his master's ways. Thou sayest it is a box, said Carne. The wood is heavy and thick. What the wood is, I do not know. The measurements are upon the paper below. Within, both the sides and bottom are quilted with soft leather, as I have also shown. Now think, Wahid Bashk, for all this case thou wilt need to have thy wits about thee. Tell me what it is by thy power, and the most cunning in all craftsmen inserts extra sides within the box, they being held by a spring, shall lie so snug that not to be noticeable by the ordinary eye. Can it be arranged so, when the box is locked? They shall fall flat upon the bottom, thus covering and holding fast what lies beneath them, and yet making the box appear to the eye as if it were empty. Is that possible for thee to do such a thing? Ajib Bashk did not reply for a few moments. His instinct told him what his master wanted, and he was not disposed to answer hastily, for he also saw that his reputation as the most cunning craftsman in India was at stake. If the heaven-born will permit me to a night for thought, he said at last, I will come to him as he rises from his bed and tell him what I can do, and he can then give his orders as it pleases him. Very good, said Carne. Then tomorrow I shall expect my report. Let the work be good, and let there be many rupees for thee to touch in return. As to the lock and the way it shall act, let that be a concern of Hiram's son. Ajib Bashk salaamed and withdrew. and Simon Carne for the time being dismissed the matter from his mind. Next morning, while he was dressing, Belton reported that two artificers desired an interview with him. He ordered them to be admitted, and forthwith they entered the room. It was noticeable that Wahidi Marsh carried in his hand a heavy box, which, upon Carnes noticing him to do so, he placed upon the table. "Have you thought over the matter?" he asked, seeing that the men waited for him to speak. "We have thought of it," replied Hiramsine, who always acted as spokesman for the pair. "If the presents were designed to look, you will see that we have made a box of the same size and shape as he drew upon the paper." "Yes, it is certainly a good copy," said Carne condescendingly after he had examined it. Ajib Bask showed his white teeth in appreciation of the compliment. Hiramsine drew closer to the table. "And now, if Sabib will open it, he will, in his wisdom, be able to tell if it resembles other that he has in his mind." Carne opened the box as requested, and discovered that the interior was an exact counterfeit of the Duchess of Wiltshire's jewel case, even to the extent of the quoted leather lining, which had been the other's principal feature. He admitted that the likeness was all that he could have desired. "As he is satisfied," said Hiramsine, "it may be that the proctor of the poor will deign to try experiment with it. See here, Ezekiel. Let it be placed in the box, so now he will see what he will see." The broad silver-backed comb lying upon the dressing table was placed on the bottom of the box, and the lid was closed, and the key turned in the lock. The case being securely fastened, Hiramsine laid it before his master. "I am to open it, I suppose?" said Carne, taking the key and replacing it in the lock. "If my master pleases," replied the other. Carne accordingly turned it in the lock, and having done so, raised the lid and looked inside. His astonishment was complete. To all intents and purposes, the box was empty. The comb was not to be seen, and yet the quilted sides and bottom were, to all appearances, just the same as when he had first looked inside. "This is most wonderful," he said, and indeed it was a clever conjuring trick as any he had seen. "Nay, it is very simple," Wahib Bash replied. "The heaven-born told me that there must be no risk of detection." He took the box in his own hands, and running his nails along the center of the quilting, divided the false bottom into two pieces. These he lifted out, revealing the comb lying upon the real bottom beneath. "The sides, as my lord will see," said Hiramsine, taking a step forward, "are held in the appointed places by these two springs. Thus, when the key is turned, the springs relax, and the sides are driven by the others in places in their bottom, where the seams in the quilting mask join. But there is one disadvantage. It is as follows. When the pieces which form the bottom are lifted out, in order that my lord may get to whatever is concealed beneath, the springs must necessarily stand revealed. However, to anyone who knows sufficient the working of the box to lift out the false bottom, it will be an easy matter to withdraw the springs and conceal them about his person." "As you say it is an easy matter," said Carne, "I shall not be likely to forget. Now, one other question. Presuming I am in a position to put the real box into your hands for, say, 8 hours, do you think that in that time you can fit it so that the detection will be impossible?" "Assuredly, my lord," replied Hiramsine with conviction. "There is but the lock and the fitting of the springs to be done. 3 hours at the most would be sufficient for that." "I am pleased with you," said Carne, "and as my proof of satisfaction, when the work is finished, you will each receive 500 rupees. Now, you can go." According to his promise, 10 o'clock on the Friday following found him in his hansom driving towards Belgrave Square. He was a little anxious, though. The casual observer would scarcely have been able to tell it. The magnitude of the stake for which he was playing was enough to try the nerve of even such a past master in his profession as Simon Carne. Arriving at the house, he discovered some workmen erecting an awning across the footway in preparation for the ball that was to take place at night. It was not long, however, before he found himself in the boudoir, reminding her Grace of her promise to permit him an opportunity of making a drawing of the famous jewel case. The Duchess was naturally busy, and within a quarter of an hour he was on his way home with the box placed in the seat of the carriage beside him. "Now," he said, as he patted the good-humoredly, "if only the notion worked out by Harmstein and Wahid holds good, the famous Wiltshire diamonds will become my property before very many hours are passed. By this time tomorrow, I suppose, London will be all agog concerning the burglary." On reaching his house, he left his carriage and himself carried the box to his study. Once there, he rang his bell and ordered Harmstein and Wahid to be sent to him. When they arrived, he showed them the box upon which they were to exercise their ingenuity. "Bring your tools in here," he said, "and do the work under my own eyes. You have but 9 hours before you, and you must make the most of them." The men went for their implements, and as soon as they were ready, they set work. All through the day they kept hard at it, with the result that by 5 o'clock the alterations had been effected and the case stood ready. By the time Carne returned from his afternoon drive in the park, it was quite prepared for the part he was to play in his scheme. Having praised the men, he turned them out and locked the door, and then went across the room and unlocked the drawer of his writing table. From it he took a flat leather jewel case to be opened. It contained the necklace of counterfeit diamonds, if anything a little larger than the one he pretended to try to obtain. He had repurchased in the morning of Burlington Arcade for the purposes of testing the apparatus the servants had made. Now he proceeded to do it. Laying it carefully on the bottom of the closed lid, he turned the key. When he opened it again, the necklace was gone. And even though he knew the secret, he would not for the life of him see where the false bottom began and ended. After that he reset the trap and tossed the necklace carelessly in. To his delight, it acted as well on the previous occasion. He could scarcely contain his satisfaction. His conscience was so sufficiently elastic to give him no trouble. To him, it was scarcely a robbery he was planning, but the artistic trial of skill, in which he pitted his wits and cunning against the forces of society in general. At 7:30 he dined, and afterwards smoked a meditative cigar with the evening paper in the billiard room. The invitations to the ball were for 10 o'clock, and at 9:30 he went to his dressing room. "Make me tidy as quick as you can," he said to Belton when he later appeared, "and while you're doing so, listen to my final instructions. Tonight, as you know, I am endeavoring to secure the Duchess of Wiltshire's necklace. Tomorrow morning all of London will resound with a hubbub, and I, having been making my plans in such a way as to arrange that Climo shall be the person consulted. When the messenger calls, if he does, see that the old woman next door bids him to tell the Duke to come personally at 12 o'clock. Do you understand?" "Perfectly, sir." "Very good. Now give me the jewel case, and let me be off. You need not sit up for me." Precisely as the clocks in the neighborhood were striking 10, Simon Carne reached Belgrave Square, and, as he hoped, found himself the first guest. His hostess and her husband received him in the anteroom and the drawing room. "I come laden with 1,000 apologies," he said as he took her Grace's hand, and bent over with a ceremonious politeness which was one's main chief characteristics. "I'm most unconsciously early, I know, but I hastened here in order that I might personally return the jewel case you so kindly lent me. I must trust your generosity forgive me. The drawings took longer than I expected." "No need to apologize," answered her Grace. "It is very kind of you that you have brought the case yourself. I hope the illustrations have proved successful. I shall look forward to seeing them as soon as they are ready, but I'm keeping you holding the box. One of my servants will take it to my room." She called a footman to her and bade him to take the box and place it upon her dressing table. "Before it must go, I must let you see that I have not damaged it either externally or internally," said Carne with a laugh. "It is such a valuable case that I should never forgive myself if it had received even a scratch during its time in my possession." So saying, he lifted the lid and allowed her to look inside. To the appearance, it was exactly the same as when she had lent it to him earlier in the day. You've been most careful, she said, and then, with an air of banter, she concluded, if you desire it, I shall be pleased to give you a certificate to that effect. They jested in a fashion for a few moments after the servant's departure, during which time Carne promised to call her upon the following morning at 11 o'clock and bring with him the illustrations he had made and a queer little piece of china he had so good a fortune to pick up at a dealer's shop the previous afternoon. By this time, fashionable London was making its way up the grand staircase, and with its appearance, further conversation became impossible. Shortly after midnight, Carne bade his hostess good night and slipped away. He was perfectly satisfied with his evening's entertainment, and if the key of the jewel case was not turned before the jewels were placed in it, he was convinced they would become his property. Speaks well for his strength of nerve when I record that fact that on going to his bed his slumbers were as peaceful and untroubled as those of a little child. Breakfast was scarcely over next morning before a hansom drew up at his front door and Lord Amberley alighted. He was ushered into Carne's presence forthwith, and on seeing that the latter had surprised by his early visit, hastened to explain. My dear fellow, he said as he took possession of the chair that the other offered him, I've come round to see you on the most important business. As I told you last night at the dance, when you so kindly asked me to come and see the steam yachts you will have purchased, I had an appointment with Wiltshire at 9:30 this morning. On reaching Belgrave Square, I found the whole house in confusion. Servants were running hither and thither with scared faces. The butler was on the borders of lunacy. The Duchess was well nigh hysterical in her boudoir, while her husband was in the study vowing vengeance against the whole world. You alarm me, said Carne, lighting his cigar with his hand, and was steady as a rock. And what on earth has happened? I think I might safely allow you 50 guesses, and then a wager of £100 you'd not hit the mark. Yet in a certain measure it concerns you. Concerns me? Good gracious, what have I done to bring all this about? Pray do not be so alarmed, said Amberley. Personally, you have done nothing. Indeed, on second thoughts, I don't know I am right in saying that it concerns you at all. The matter of the fact is, Carne, a burglary took place last night at the Wiltshire house. The famous necklace has disappeared. Good heavens, you don't say so. But I do. The circumstances of the case are as follows. When my cousin retired to her room last night after the ball, she unclasped the necklace, and in her husband's presence placed it carefully in her jewel case, which she'd locked. That having been done, Wiltshire took the box to the room and contained the safe, and placed it there himself, locking the iron door with his own key. The room was occupied last night, according to custom, by the butler and one of the footmen, both of whom have been in the family since they were boys. Next morning, after breakfast, the Duke unlocked the safe and took out the box, intending to convey it to the bank as usual. Before leaving, however, he placed it on the study table and went upstairs to speak to his wife. He cannot remember exactly how long it was absent, but he feels convinced that he was not gone more than a quarter of an hour at the very utmost. The conversation finished, she accompanied him downstairs, where she saw him take up the case to carry it to his own carriage. Before he left the house, however, she said, I suppose you have locked the case to see if the necklace is all right. How could I do so? Was his reply. You know you possess the only key that will fit it. She felt in her pockets, but to her surprise, the key was not there. If I were a detective, I should say that there was a point to be remembered, said Carne with a smile. Pray, where did she find her keys? Upon her dressing table, said Emily, though she was not the slightest recollection of leaving them there. Well, when she had procured the keys, what happened? Why, they opened the box, and to their astonishment and dismay, they found it empty. The jewels were gone. Good gracious, what a terrible loss! It seems almost impossible that it can be true. And pray, what did they do? At first they stood staring at the empty box, hardly believing the evidence in their own eyes. Stare how they would, however, they could not bring them back. The jewels had without doubt disappeared. When the robbery had taken place, it was impossible to say. After that, they owned it up with servants and questioned them, but the result was what they might have foreseen. No one, from the butler to the kitchen maid, could throw any light on the subject. To this minute, it remains a great mystery as when they first discovered it. "I'm more concerned than I can tell you," said Carne. "How thankful I ought to be that I returned the case to her grace last night. But in thinking of myself, I am forgetting to ask what has brought you to me. If I can be of any assistance, I hope you'll command me." "Well, I tell you why I came," replied Lord Amberley. "Naturally, they're most anxious to have the mystery solved, and the jewels recovered as soon as possible. Wiltshire wanted to send to Scotland Yard then and there, but his wife I eventually persuaded to come consult Climo. As you know, if police authorities are called in, he first refuses the business altogether. Now, we thought, as you are his next-door neighbor, you might possibly be able to assist us." "You may be very sure, my lord. I will do everything what lies in my power. Let us go in and see him at once." As he spoke, he rose and threw the remainder of his cigarette into the fireplace. His visitor having imitated his example, they procured their hats and walked around the Park Lane to Belverton Street to bring up at number 1. After they had rung the bell, the door was opened to them by the old woman, who invariably received the detective's clients. "Is Climo at home?" asked Carne, "and if so, can we see him?" The little old lady was a little deaf, and the question had been repeated before she could have made me understand what was wanted. As soon, however, as she realized their desire, she informed them that their master was absent from town and would be back as usual at 12 o'clock to meet his clients. "What on earth's to be done?" said the Earl, looking at his companion in dismay. "I'm afraid I can't come back again, as I have a most important appointment at that hour." "Do you think you could entrust the business to me?" asked Carne. "If so, I will make a point of seeing him at 12 o'clock, and call around Wiltshire House afterwards and tell the Duke what I have done." "That's very good of you," replied Amberley. "I fear sure would not put you out to be much trouble. That would be quite the best thing to be done." "I will do it with pleasure," Carne replied. "I feel it my duty to help in whatever way I can." "You're very kind," said the other. "Then, as I understand, you are to call upon Climo at 12 o'clock, and afterwards to let my cousins know what you have succeeded in doing. I only hope you will be help to us. Secure the thief. We're having too many of these burglaries just now. I must catch this hansom and be off. Goodbye, and many thanks." "Goodbye," said Carne, and shook him by the hand. The hansom having rolled away, Carne retraced his steps into his own abode. "It is really very strange," he muttered as he walked on, "how often a chance consents to lend her assistance to my little schemes. The mere fact that his Grace left the box unwatched in his study for a quarter of an hour may serve to throw the police off on quite another scent. I'm also glad that they decided to open the case in the house, for it had been gone to the bankers and had been examined in the strong room. I should never have been able to get the possession of the jewels at all." 3 hours later, he drove to Wiltshire House and saw the Duke. The Duchess was far too upset by the catastrophe to see anyone. "This is really most kind of you, Mr. Carne," said his Grace when the other had supplied the elaborate account of his interview with Climo. "We're extremely indebted to you. I'm sorry he cannot come before 10 o'clock tonight, but that he makes the stipulation of my seeing him alone, for I must confess I should like to have someone else present to ask any questions that might escape me." "But if that's his usual hour and custom, well, we must abide by it, that's all. I hope he will do some good, for this is the greatest calamity that has ever befallen me. And as I told you just now, it has made my wife quite ill. She confined to her bedroom and quite hysterical." "You do not suspect anyone, I suppose?" inquired Carne. "Not a soul," the other answered. "The thing is such a mystery that we know not what to think. I feel convinced, however, that my servants are as innocent as I am. Nothing will ever make me think them otherwise. I wish I could catch the fellow, that's all. I'd make him suffer for the trick he's played me." Carne offered up an appropriate reply, and after a little further conversation upon the subject, bade the irate nobleman goodbye and left his house. From Belgrave Square he drove to one of the clubs of which he had been elected a member, in the search of Lord Opington, with whom he had promised to lunch, and afterwards took him to the shipbuilder's yard near Greenwich in order to show him the steam yacht he had lately purchased. It was upon close to dinner time before he returned to his own residence. He brought Lord Opington with him, and they dined in state together. At 9 the latter bade him good-bye, and at 10 Carne retired to his dressing-room and rang for Belton. "What have you to report?" he asked. "With regard to what I bade you to do in Belgrave Square." "I followed your instructions to the letter," Belton replied. "Yesterday morning I wrote to Messrs. Hornblow and Jimson, the house agents in Piccadilly, in the name of Colonel Braithwaite, and asked for an order to view the real residency right next to the Wiltshire house. I asked that an order might be sent direct to the house, where the colonel would be getting to his arrival. This letter I posted myself in banking stroke, as you desired me to do. At 9 o'clock yesterday morning I dressed myself as much like an elderly army officer as possible, and took a cab to Belgrave Square. The caretaker, an old fellow of close upon 70 years of age, admitted me immediately, and upon hearing my name, I proposed that he should show me over the house. This, however, I told him was quite unnecessary, backing my speech with the present of half-a-crown, whereupon I returned to the breakfast perfectly satisfied, while I wandered about the house in my own leisure. Reaching the same floor that is upon which I situated the room in which the Duke's safe is kept, I discovered that your supposition was quite correct, that it would be possible for a man, opening the window, to make his way along the coping from one house to the other without being seen. I made certain that there was no one in the bedroom in which the butler slept, and then arranged for a long telescope walking stick you gave me, and fixed one of my boots to it by means of a screw at the end. With this I was able to make regular succession of footsteps, ledge along the edge between the window and the other. That done, I went downstairs and bade the caretaker good morning, and got into my cab. From Belgrave Square I drove to the shop of the pawnbroker whom you told me you had discovered was out of town. His assistant inquired my business and was anxious to do what he could for me. I told him, however, that I must see his master personally, as it was about the sale of some diamonds I had left to me. I pretended to be annoyed that he was not at home, and muttered to myself, so that the man could hear, something about its meaning a journey to Amsterdam. Then I limped into the shop, paid off my cab, and walked down the street, removed my mustache, and altered my appearance by taking off my great coat and muffler. A few streets further I purchased a bowler and a hat place of the old-fashioned topper I had hitherto been wearing, then took a cab from Piccadilly and came home. You have fulfilled my instructions admirably, said Carne, and if the business comes off, as I expect it will, you shall receive your usual percentage. Now I must be turned into Climo, and be off to Belgrave Square to put his Grace of Wiltshire back on the track of the burglar. Before he retired to rest that night, Simon Carne took something, wrapped in a red scarf handkerchief, and capacious pockets from the coat Climo had been wearing a few months before. Having rolled the covering, he held it up to the light of the magnificent necklace which for so many years had been the joy and pride of the ducal house of Wiltshire. The electric light played upon it, and touched it in 1,000 different hues. "Where so many have failed," he said to himself, as he wrapped it in the handkerchief again and locked it in his safe. "It is pleasant to be able to congratulate oneself on having succeeded. It is without its equal, and I don't think I shall ever overstep my mark if I say that I will think she receives it. Liz will be glad she lent me the money." Next morning all London was astonished by the news that the famous Wiltshire diamonds had been stolen, and a few hours later Carne learnt from an evening paper that the detectives who had taken up the case, upon the supposed retirement of it from Kitno, were still completely in fault. That evening he was to entertain several friends at dinner. They included Lord Amberley, Lord Orpington, and the prominent member of the Privy Council. Lord Amberley arrived late, but filled to overflowing with importance. His friends noticed his state and questioned him. "Well, gentlemen," he answered as he took up a commanding position at the drawing room hearthrug, "I am in a position to inform you that Climo has reported upon the case, and the upshot of it is that the Wiltshire diamond mystery is a mystery no longer." "What do you mean?" asked the others in chorus. "I meant that he sent in this report to Wiltshire this afternoon, as arranged. From what he said the other night, after being alone in the room in the empty jewel case and magnifying glass for 2 minutes or so, he was in a position to describe the modus operandi, and what is more, that the police puts the police on the scent of the burglar." "And how was it worked?" asked Carne. "From an empty house next door," replied the other. "On the morning of the burglary, a man pretending to be a retired army officer called with an order to an interview, got the caretaker out of the way, and clambered along the Wiltshire house by means of a parapet outside, reaching the room during the time the servants were at breakfast, opened the safe, and abstracted the jewels." "But how did Climo find all that out?" asked Lord Orpington. "His own inimitable cleverness," replied Lord Amberley. "At any rate, it has been proved that he was correct. The man did make his way from next door, and the police have since discovered that an individual answering to the description given visited a pawnbroker's shop in the city an hour later and stated that the diamonds were available for sale." "If that is so, it turns out to be a very simple mystery after all," said Lord Orpington as they began their meal. "Thanks to the ingenuity and cleverness of the detective of the world," remarked Amberley. "In that case, there's a good health to Climo," said the Privy Councillor, raising his glass. "I will join you in that," said Simon Carne. "Here's a very good health to Climo and his connection with the Duchess of Wiltshire's diamonds. May he always be equally successful." "Hear, hear to that," said all the guests. Okay, I'm going to have to let the ads run because I paused them 3 times. But I wanted to finish that story, and I was on like the last page. Well, second to last page when the first ad things hit. So I will see everyone after a bit. Maybe, if I can find my thing. Where is it? Oh, there's BR back. In a bit. kept forgetting how to put the cat cam on the BR back screen. But look at those babies. They're so adorable. Just snoozing while I'm reading. Kind of surprised I got all three of them on there. They're such good cats. My two big black kitty boys, my little cat girl. Can't remember if I cropped that on the picture side where the girl is or not. I cropped a little. Let me see if I can fix that. There we go. Now you can see them all. Look at my cats. They're adorable. That's not only people I put to sleep reading, I put cats to sleep too. Anyway, we're back from ads. Guess I should go back and study. What did I get here? Oh, notification. Fire aid benefits. Anyway, yeah. Everyone got to see the cat cam. Live cats. Live but sleeping cats. But you got to see the cats. So that's a good day if you get to see cats, right? Right. Anyway. Okay, so we know what kind of person this is. Of course, the title is Prince of Swindlers anyway, so that kind of makes sense. How long is the second story? It is 14 pages, give or take. Last one was long because it was actually 16. Anyway. I did hydrate during that break, but you can see it. Tell I'm still coughing. So our second story. A Prince of Swindlers by Guy Boothby. An Imperial Finale. Of all the functions that ornament the calendar of the English social and sporting year, surely the Cow's Week may claim to rank as one of the greatest, or at least the most enjoyable. So thought Simon Carne as he sat on the deck of Lord Ramerton's yacht, anchored off the mouth of Medina River, smoking his cigarette and whispering soft nothings into the little shell-like ear of Lady Mabel Matterley, the lady of all others who had won the rights to be considered the beauty of the past season. It was a perfect afternoon, and, as if to fill the flagon of enjoyment to the very brim, he had won the Queen's Cup with his yacht, the unknown quantity, only half an hour before. Small wonder, therefore, that he was contented with his lot in life, and his good fortune of the afternoon in particular. The tiny harbor was crowded with shipping of all sorts, shapes, and sizes, including the guardship, His Imperial Majesty, the Emperor of Westphalia's yacht, the Hohenstralis, the English royal yachts, steam yachts, schooners, cutters, and all the various crafts taking part in England's greatest water carnival. The steam launches darted hither and thither, smartly equipped gigs conveyed gaily dressed parties from vessel to vessel, while ashore the little town itself was alive with bunting and echoing in the strains of almost continuous music. "Surely you ought to consider yourself a very happy man, Mr. Carne," said Lady Mabel Matterly with a smile in reply to a speech of the others. "You won the Derby in June, and today you have appropriated the Queen's Cup." "If such things can constitute happiness, I suppose I must be in the seventh of heaven by light." "If such things constitute happiness, I suppose I must be in the seventh heaven of delight," answered Carne, as he took another cigarette from his case and lit it. "All the same, I am insatiable enough to desire still greater fortune. When one has set one's heart upon winning something besides which the Derby and the Queen's Cup are items scarcely worth considering, one is rather apt to feel that fortune has still much to give." "I'm afraid that I do not quite grasp your meaning," she said, but there was a look in her face that told him that, if she did not understand, she could at least make a very good guess. According to the world's reckoning, he was quite the best fish in swimming in the matrimonial pond, and some people, for the past few weeks, had even gone so far as to say that she had hooked him. It could not be denied that he had been paying her unmistakable attention of late. What answer he would have vouchsafed to her speech is impossible to say, for at that moment their host came along the deck towards him, and he carried a note in his hand. "I just received a message to say that His Imperial Majesty is going to honor us with a visit," he said, when he reached them. "If I mistake not, that is his launch coming towards us now." Lady Mabel and Simon Carne rose and accompanied him to the starboard bulwarks. A smart white launch with the Westphalian flag flying at her stern had left the royal yacht and was steaming quickly towards them. A few minutes later it had reached the companion ladder, and Lord Tremorden had descended to welcome his royal guest. When they reached the deck together, His Majesty took the hands of Lady Tremorden and afterwards with Lady Mabel and Simon Carne. "I must congratulate you heartily, Mr. Carne," he said, "on your victory today. You gave us an excellent race, and I thought I had the misfortune to have beaten in 30 seconds. Still, I have the satisfaction of knowing that the winner has a better boat in every way than my own." "Your Majesty adds to the sweats of victory the generous acceptance of defeat," Carne replied, "but I must confess that I owe my success in no way to my own ability. The boat was chosen for me by another, and I have not even the satisfaction of saying I had sailed her before." "Nevertheless, it is your property, and you will go down in prosperity, famous for yachting annals as the winner of the Queen's Cup in this justly celebrated year." With this compliment, His Majesty turned to his hostess and entered a conversation with her, leaving the aide-de-camp free to discuss the events of the day with Lady Mabel. When he took his departure half an hour later, Carne also bade his friends good-bye, and, descending to his boat, was rowed to his own beautiful steam yacht, which was anchored a few cable lengths away from the Imperial craft. He was to dine on board the latter vessel that evening. On gaining the deck, he was met by Belton, his valet, who carried a telegram in his hand. As soon as he received it, Carne opened it and glanced at its contents, without, however, betraying very much interest. An instant later, the expression upon his face changed like magic. Still holding the message in his hand, he turned to Belton. "Come below," he said very quickly. "There is news enough here to give us something to think of for the few hours to come." Reaching the saloon, which was decorated with all the daintiness of the upholsterer's art, he led the way to the cabin he had arranged as a study. Having entered it, he shut and locked the door. "It's all up, Belton," he said. "The comedy has lasted long enough, and now only remains for us to speak the tag, and after that to ring the curtain down as speedily as we may." I'm afraid, sir, I do not quite take your meaning, said Belton. Would you mind telling me what has happened? I can do that in very few words, the other answered. This cablegram is from Trincomalee Liz, and was dispatched from Bombay yesterday. Read it yourself. He handed the paper to his servant, who read it carefully aloud. Dear Carne, Portrait House, Park Lane, London. Bradfield left a fortnight since. Have ascertained that you are the object. Trincomalee. This is very serious, sir, said the other when he had finished. As you say, it is very serious indeed, Carne replied. Bradford thinks he has caught me at last, I suppose, but he seems to forget that it is impossible for me to be as clever as himself. Let me look at the message again. He left a fortnight ago, did he? Then I've a little respite. By Jove, if that's all the case, I'll see that I make the most of it. But surely, sir, you will leave at once, said Bolton quickly. If this man, who has been after us so long, is now more than halfway to England, coming on the deliberate intention of running you to the earth, surely, sir, you'll see the visibility of making your escape while you have time. Carne smiled indulgently. Of course I shall escape, my good Belton, he said. You have never known me to neglect to take proper precautions yet, but before I go I must do one more piece of business. It must be something by the light of which I have hitherto accomplished will look like nothing. Something really great that will make England open its eyes, as it has not done yet. Belton stared at him, this time in undisguised amazement. Do you mean to tell me, sir, he said, with the freedom of a privileged servant, that you intend to run another risk when the only man who knows sufficient of your career to bring you to the book is certain to be in England in less than a fortnight? I cannot believe you would be so foolish, sir. I beg you to think of what you are doing. Carne, however, paid but small attention to his servant's entreaties. The difficulty, he said to himself, speaking his thoughts aloud, is to understand quite what to do. I seem to have used up all my big chances. However, I think it over, and it will be strange if I don't hit upon something. In the meantime, Belton, you had better see that preparations are made for leaving England on Friday next. Tell the skipper to have everything ready. We shall have done our work by that time. Then hey open sea and freedom for the trammels of a social life once more. You might drop a hint or two to certain people that I'm going, and be more careful of what you say. Write the agents about Portrait House, and attend to all the necessary details. You may leave me now. Belton bowed and left the cabin without another word. He knew his master sufficiently well to feel certain that neither entreaties or exploitations would make him abandon the course he had mapped out for himself. That being so, he bowed to the inevitable with a grace which had now become a habit to him. When he was alone, Carne once more sat upon upwards an hour in earnest thought. Then he ordered his gig, and, when it was ready, to set out to shore. Making his way to a telegraph office, he dispatched a message which, at any other, less busy time, would have astonished the operator with some astonishment. It was addressed to a Mohammedan dealer in precious stones in Bombay, and contained only 2 words in addition to the signature. They were, "Leaving. Come." He knew that they would reach the person for whom they were intended, and that she would understand their meaning and act accordingly. The dinner that night on board of the Imperial yacht in Homisalis was a gorgeous affair in every sense of the word. All the principal yacht owners were present, and at the conclusion of the banquet, Carne's health, as winner of the great event of the regatta, was proposed by the Emperor himself, and drunk amid enthusiastic applause. It was a proud moment for the individual in question, but he bore the honors with that quiet dignity that had stood him in such a good stead on so many similar occasions. In his speech he referred to his approaching departure of England, and thus the first inkling of such news came upon the audience like a thunderclap. When they had taken leave of his Majesty soon after midnight, and were standing on the deck waiting for the respective boats to draw up to the accommodation ladder, Lord Opington made his way to where Simon Carne was standing. "Is it really true you intend on leaving us so soon?" he asked. "Quite true, unfortunately," Carne replied. "I had hoped to have remained longer, but circumstances over which I have no control make it imperative that I should return to India without delay. Businesses that exercise a vital influence upon my fortune compels me. Therefore, I am obliged to leave without fail on next Friday. I've given orders to that effect this afternoon." "I'm extremely sorry to hear about it. That's all I can say," said Lord Amberley, who had just come up. "I'm sure that we shall miss you very much indeed." "You have all been extremely kind," said Carne, "and I have to thank you for an exceedingly pleasant time. But there, let us postpone consideration of the matter for as long as possible. I think this is my boat. Won't you let me take you as far as your own yacht?" "Many thanks, but I don't think we need trouble you," said Lord Orpington. "I see my gig is just behind yours." "In that case, good night," said Carne. "I shall see you, as arranged, tomorrow morning, I suppose?" "At 11, said Lord Amberley. "We'll call you and go ashore together. Good night." By the time Carne had reached his yacht, he had made up his mind. He also had hit upon another scheme, the daring of which almost frightened himself. If only he could bring it off, he told himself, it would indeed be a fitting climax to all he had accomplished since he had arrived in England. Retiring to his own cabin, he allowed Belton to assist him on his preparations for the night almost without speaking. It was not until the other was about to leave the cabin that he broached the subject that was occupying his mind to the exclusion of all else. "Belton," he said, "I have decided upon the greatest scheme that has yet come into my mind. If Simon Carne is going to say farewell to the English people on Friday next, and it succeeds, he will leave them a legacy to think about some time after he is gone." "You're surely not going to attempt anything farther, sir?" said Belton in alarm. "I did hope, sir, that you would listen to my entreaties this afternoon." "It was impossible for me to do so," said Carne. "I am afraid, Belton, you are a little lacking in ambition. I've noticed that on the last 3 occasions you have endeavored to dissuade me from my own endeavors to promote more healthy excitement in the English reading public. On this occasion, fortunately, I am able to withstand you. Tomorrow morning you commence preparations for my biggest piece of work to which I have put my hand to yet." "If you have set your mind upon doing it, sir, I am quite aware that it is hopeless for me to say anything," said Belton resignedly. "May I know, however, what is it going to be?" Carne paused for a moment before he replied. "I happen to know that the Emperor of Westphalia, whose friendship I have honour to claim," he said, "has a magnificent collection of gold plate on board his yacht. It is my intention, if possible, to become the possessor of it." "Surely that will be impossible, sir," said Belton. "Clever as you undoubtedly are in arranging these things, I do not see how you can do it. A ship at the best times is such a public place, and they will certainly guard it very closely." "I must confess that at first glance I do not quite see how it is to be managed, but I have a scheme in my head which I think might possibly enable me to effect that purpose. At any rate, I shall be able to tell you more about it tomorrow. First, let us try a little experiment." As he spoke, he seated himself at the dressing table and bade Belton to bring him a box which had hitherto been standing in a corner. When he opened it, it proved to be a pretty little cedarwood affair divided into a number of small compartments, each of which contained crepe hair of a different color. Selecting a small portion from one particular compartment, he unravelled it until it had obtained the length he wanted, and then with dexterous fingers constructed a moustache, which he attached with spirit gum to his upper lip. 2 or 3 twirls gave the necessary curl, and then a pair of ivory-backed brushes taken from his dressing table, he brushed his hair back in a particular manner, placed a hat of uncommon shape upon his head, took a heavy boat cloak from his cupboard near at hand, and threw it round his shoulders, and assuming an almost defiant expression, faced Belton, and desired to tell him whom he resembled. Familiar as he was with his master's marvelous power of disguise and his extraordinary faculty for imitation, The letter could not refrain from expressing his astonishment. "His Imperial Majesty the Emperor of Westphalia," he said. "The likeness is perfect." "Good," said Carne. "From that exhibition you will gather something of my plans. Tomorrow evening, as you are aware, I am invited to meet His Majesty, who is to dine ashore, accompanied by his aide-de-camp, Count von Walsberg. Here is the latter's photograph. He possesses, as you know, a very decided personality, which is all in our favor. Study it carefully." So saying, he took from a drawer a photograph which he propped against a looking-glass on the side table before him. It represented a tall, military-looking individual with bristling eyebrows, a large nose, and a very grey moustache, and hair of the same color. Belton examined it carefully. "I can only suppose, sir," he said, "that you're telling me this you intend me to represent Count von Walsberg." "Exactly," said Carne. "That is my intention. It should not be at all difficult. The Count is just your height and build. You only need the mustache, eyebrows, and grey hair, and the large nose to look the part exactly. Tomorrow will be a dark night. If only I can control circumstances sufficiently to obtain the chance I want, detection in the first part of our scheme, at any rate, should be most unlikely, if not at all impossible." "You'll excuse me in saying so, sir," said Belton, "but it seems a very risky game to play when we have done so well up to present." "I must admit that the glory will be greater, my friend, if we succeed." "But surely, sir, as I said just now, they will have the place you mentioned in a secure place, and it will be properly guarded." "I have made my fullest inquiries, you may be sure. It is kept in a safe in the chief steward's cabin, and while it is on board, a sentry is always on duty at the door. Yes, all things considered, I should say it is kept in a remarkably secure place." "Then, sir, I am still at a loss to see how you are going to obtain possession of it." Carne smiled indulgently. It pleased him to see how perplexed his servant was. "In the simplest manner possible," he said, "provided always that I can get on board the yacht without my identity being questioned. The manner in which we are to leave the vessel will be rather more dangerously, but not sufficient to say cause any great uneasiness. You are a good swimmer, I know, so that 100 yards should not hurt you. You must also have a number of stout canvas sacks, say 6 prepared, and securely attached to each of the same number of strong lines. The latter must be 50 fathoms long, and have at the end of each a stout swivel hook. The rest is only a matter of detail. Now, what have you arranged with regard to matters in town?" "I have fulfilled your instructions, sir, to the letter," said Belton. "I have communicated with the agents who act for the owner of the Wiltshire house. I have caused an advertisement to be inserted in all the papers tomorrow morning to the effect that the renowned detective Climo will be unable to meet his clients for at least a month, owing to the fact that he has accepted an important engagement upon the continent, which will take him from home for that length of time. I have negotiated the sale of the various horses you have in training, and I have also arranged for the disposal of the animals in the carriages you now have in use in London. Ramgafur and the other native servants of Wiltshire House will come down to the midday train tomorrow, but before they do so, they will fulfill your instructions and repair the hole in the wall between the 2 houses. I cannot think of any more, sir." "You have succeeded admirably, my dear Belton," said Carne, "and I am very pleased tomorrow you had better see that the preparation paragraph is inserted in the daily papers announcing the fact that my intention to leave England for India immediately, on important business matters. I think that will do for tonight." Belton tidied the cabin, and having done so, bade his master good night. It was plain that he was exceedingly nervous about the success of the enterprise upon which Carne was embarking so confidently. The latter, on the other hand, retired to rest, and slept as peacefully as if he had not a care or anxiety upon his mind. Next morning he was up by sunrise, and by the time his friends Lords Opington and Emberley were thinking about breakfast, had put the finishing touches to the scheme which was to bring his career in England to such a fitting termination. According to the arrangement entered into the previous day, his friends called for him at 11. Then they went ashore together. It was a lovely morning, and Carne was in the highest spirits. They visited Castle together, and made some purchases in town, then went to lunch on Lord Orpington's yacht. It was well nigh 3 o'clock before Carne bade his host and hostess farewell, and descended the gangway in order to return to his own vessel. The brisk sea was running, and for this reason the step into the boat was exceedingly difficult, if not a dangerous matter. Either he miscalculated the distance, or he must have jumped in at the wrong moment. At any rate, he missed his footing and fell heavily to the bottom. Scarcely a second, however, had elapsed before his coxswain had sprung up to his assistance and had handed him up to the seats of the stern. It was then discovered that he had been unfortunate enough to once give a nasty twist to his ankle, which had brought him such grief when he had been staying in the Greenthorpe Park on the occasion of the famous wedding. "Ah, dear fellow, I'm so sorry," said Lord Orpington, who had witnessed the accident. "Won't you come aboard again? If you can't walk up the ladder, we can easily hoist you over the side." "Many thanks," replied Carne, "but I think I can manage to get back to my own boat. It is better that I should do so. My man has had experience with my little ailments, and knows exactly what is best to be done under the circumstances. But it is a terrible nuisance all the same. I'm afraid it will be impossible for me now to present at Royal Highness's dinner this evening, and I have been looking forward to it so much." "We shall be exceedingly sorry," said Lord Amberley. "I shall come across this afternoon to see how you are." "You are very kind," said Carne, "and I shall be immensely glad to see you if you can spare the time." With that, he gave the signal to his men to push off. By the time he reached his own yacht, his foot was so painful that it was necessary for him to be lifted on board, a circumstance which was duly noticed by the occupants of the surrounding yachts, who had brought their glasses to bear upon him. Once below in his saloon, he was placed in a comfortable chair and left to Belton's careful attention. "I trust you've not hurt yourself very much, sir," said the faithful individual, who, however, could not prevent a look of satisfaction coming to his face, when it seemed that he was not ill pleased that his master would, after all, be prevented from carrying out some hazardous scheme he had proposed to him the previous evening. "My dear Bolton, how peculiarly dense you are today," he said with a smile, as he noticed the other's amazement. "Cannot you see that I've only been acting as you yourself wished I should do this morning, namely taking precautions? Surely you must see that, if I am laid up on board my yacht with a sprained ankle, society will say that it is quite impossible for me to be doing any mischief elsewhere. Now tell me, is everything prepared for tonight?" "Everything, sir," Bolton replied. "The dresses and wigs are ready. The canvas sacks and the lines to which the spring hooks are attached are in your cabin waiting your inspection. As far as I can see, everything is prepared, and I hope will meet with your satisfaction." "If you are as careful as usual, I feel it will," said Carne. "Now get some bandages and make this foot of mine look into an artistic bundle as you possibly can. After that, help me on deck and prop me up in a chair. As soon as my accident gets known, there will be certain to be shoals of callers on board, and I must play the part as carefully as possible." As Carne had predicted, this proved to be true. From 3:30 until well after 6 o'clock, a succession of boats drew up at his accommodation ladder, and the sufferer on deck was a recipient of much attention, as would be flattered the vainest of men. He had been careful to send a letter of apology to the illustrious individual who he was have been host, expressing his sincere regrets that the accident which had so befallen him would prevent the possibility of his being able to present at the dinner he was giving that evening. Day closed in and found the sky covered with heavy clouds. Towards 8 o'clock a violent storm of rain fell, and when Carne heard it beating upon the deck above his cabin, and reflected that in consequence the nights would in probability be dark, he felt that his lucky star was indeed ascendant. At 8:30 he retired to his cabin with Belton, in order to prepare for the events of the evening. Never before had he paid such careful attention to his make-up. He knew that on this occasion the least carelessness might lead to detection, and he had no desire that his latest and greatest exploit should be proved to be of his undoing. It was 9:30 before he and his servant had dressed and were ready to set off. Then, placing a broad-brimmed hats upon their heads, and carrying a portmanteau containing the cloaks and headgear which they were to wear later in the evening, they went on deck and descended into the dinghy which was waiting alongside. In something under a quarter of an hour they had put to shore in a secluded spot and changed their costumes, and were walking boldly down the water beside the steps where they could see the Imperial launch still waiting. The crew were lolling about, just joking and laughing, secure in the knowledge that it would be some hours at least before their sovereign would be likely to require their services again. Their astonishment, therefore, may well be imagined when they saw approaching them the two men whom they had only half an hour before brought ashore. Stepping in and taking his seat under the shelter, His Majesty ordered them to convey him back to the yacht with all speed. The accent and voice were perfect, and it never for an instant struck anyone on board that the deception was being practiced. Carne, however, was aware that only a preliminary. The most dangerous portion of the business was yet to come. On reaching the yacht, he sprang out in the ladder, and followed by his aide-de-camp, von Walsberg, mounted the steps. His disguise must have been perfect indeed, for when he reached the deck he found himself face to face with the first lieutenant, who, on seeing him, saluted respectfully. For a moment Carne's presence in mind almost deserted him. Then, seeing that he was not discovered, he determined upon a bold piece of bluff. Returning the officer's salute with just the air he had seen the Emperor use, he led him to suppose that he had important reasons for coming on board so soon, and if to back this assertion, bade him send the chief steward to his cabin, and at the same time have the sentry removed from his door and placed at the end of a large saloon, with instructions to let no one pass until he communicated again. The officer saluted and went off with his errand, while Carne, ascending to Belton to follow him, made his way down the companion ladder to the royal cabins. To both the next few minutes seemed like hours. Reaching the imperial stateroom, they entered it and closed the door behind. Provided the sentry obeyed his orders, which there was no reason to doubt he would do, and the Emperor himself did not return until they were safely off the vessel again, there seemed every probability of their being able to carry out their scheme without a hitch. Put those things on the table and unwind the lines and place them in the gallery outside the window. They won't be seen there, said Carne to Belton, who was watching him from the doorway. Then stand by in here a few minutes, and the chief steward will be here. As soon as he enters, you must manage to get between him and the door, and while I am engaging him in conversation, spring on him, clutch him by the throat, and hold him until I can force a gag into his mouth. After that we shall be safe for some time at least, for not a soul will come this way until they discover their mistake. It seems to me we ought to be able to thank our stars that Chief Steward's cabin is placed in such a convenient location. But hush, here comes the individual we want. Be ready to collar him as soon as I hold up my hand. If he makes a sound, we are lost. He had scarcely spoken before there was a knock at the door. When it opened, the chief steward entered the cabin, closing the door behind him. Schmidt, said His Majesty, who was standing at the further end of the cabin, I have sent you an order that I may question you on the matter of utmost importance. Draw nearer. The man came forward as he was ordered, and having done so, looked at his master full fair on the face. Something he saw there seemed to stagger him. He glanced at him for a second, and then immediately confirmed his belief. You are not the Emperor, he cried. There is some treachery in this. I shall call for assistance. He had half turned when he was about to give the alarm when Carne held up his hand, and Belton, who had been creeping stealthily behind him, threw himself upon him and clutched him by the throat before he could utter a sound. The fictitious Emperor immediately produced a cleverly constructed gag and forced it into the terrified man's mouth, who in another second was lying upon the floor, bound hand and foot. There, my friend, said Carne carefully, as he rose to his feet a few moments later. I don't think you will give us any further trouble. Let me see how those straps are tied off, and then we'll place you on the settee, and afterwards get to business with all possible dispatch. Having satisfied himself on these points, he signed to Belton, and between them they placed the man upon the couch. Let me see. I think, if I remember rightly, you carry the key of the safe in this pocket? So saying, he turned the man's pockets inside out and appropriated a bunch of keys he found within. Choosing one from it, and gave it a final look to the bonds secured the prostrate figure, and then turned to Belton. I think you'll do, he said. Now for business. Bring the bags and come with me. So saying, he crossed the cabin, and having assured himself that there was no one else about to pry upon them, passed along the luxuriously carpeted alleyway until he arrived at the door of the cabin, assigned to the use of the chief steward, and in which was a safe containing the magnificent gold plate, the obtaining of which was the reason of their being there. To his surprise and chagrin, the door was closed and locked. In his plans he had omitted to allow for this contingency. In all probability, however, the key was in the man's pocket, so turning to Belton, he bade him return to the stateroom and bring the keys he had thrown upon the table. The latter did as he was ordered, and when he had disappeared, Carne stood alone in the alleyway, waiting and listening for various noises of the great vessel. On the deck overhead, he could hear someone tramping heavily up and down, and then an interval of silence, the sound of pouring rain. Good reason as he had to be anxious, he could not stop smiling as he thought the incongruity of his position. He wondered what his aristocratic friends would say if he were captured and his story came to light. In his time he had impersonated a good many people, but never before had he had the honor of occupying such an exalted station. This was, alas, the most daring of all his adventures. Minutes went by, and as Belton did not return, Carne found himself growing nervous. What could have become of him? He was in the act of going in search of him, when he appeared carrying in his hand a bunch of keys for which he had been sent. His master seized him eagerly. Why have you been so long? He asked in a whisper. I began to think something had gone wrong with you. I stayed to make our friend secure, the other answered. He had well nigh managed to get one of his hands free. Had he done so, he would have gotten the gag out and his mouth in no time, and had given the alarm. Then we should have been caught like rats in a trap. Are you quite sure he's secure now? Said Carne anxiously. Quite. I took good care of that. In that case, we had better get to work with the safe without further delay. We have wasted too much time already, and already every moment is added danger. Without more ado, Carne placed the most likely key in the lock and turned it. The bolt shot back, and the treasure chamber lay at his mercy. The cabin was not a large one, but it was plain that every precaution had been taken to render it secure. The large safe was contained in the imperial plate, in which Carne's intention was to rifle occupied one entire side. It was the latest design, and Carne saw that it had to confess to himself that, expert craftsman as he was, it was one that would have required all his skill to open. With the master key, however, it was only the work of a few seconds. The key was turned, the lever pressed, and then, with a slight pull, the heavy door swung forward. This done, it was seen that the interior was full to overflowing. Gold and silver plate of all sorts of descriptions, clothes and bags of wash leather and green baize, were neatly arranged inside. It was a haul such as even Carne had never seen at his mercy before, and now that he had got it, he was determined to make the most of it. Come, Belton, he said, get these things out as quickly as possible and lay them on the floor. We can only carry away a certain portion of the plunder, so let us be certain that that portion is the best. A few moments later, the entire cabin was strewn with salvers, goblets, bowls, dirges, gold and silver dishes, plates, cups, knives, forks, and almost every example of goldsmith's art. In his choice, Carne was not guided by what was handsomest or most delicate workmanship. Weight was his only standard. Silver was discarded altogether, for it was less than no account. In something under 10 minutes he had made his selection, and the stout canvas bags they had brought with them for that purpose were full to their utmost holding capacity. We can carry no more, said Carne to his faithful retainer, as they made for the mouth of the last bag secure. Pick up yours and let us get back to the Emperor's States. Having locked the door to the cabin, they returned to where the place hence they had started. They were found the unfortunate steward lying there just as they had left him in the settee. Placing the bags he carried upon the ground, Carne crossed to him and, before anything else, carefully examined the bonds with which he was secured. Having done this, he went to the stern windows and, throwing one open, stepped into the gallery outside. Fortunately for what he intended to do, it was still raining, and the consequence the night was as dark as the most consummate conspirator could have desired. Returning to the room, he bade Belton to help him carry the bags into the gallery, and when this was done, he made fast the swivel hooks to the rings of each mouth each. Take up your bags as quietly as possible, he said, and lower them one by one into the water, but take care that they don't get entangled with the propeller. When you've done that, slip the rings at the other end to the lines of your belt, and buckle the latter tightly. Belton did as he was ordered, and in a few moments the 6 bags were lying at the bottom of the sea. Now, off with these wigs and things, and when you're ready, say you're ready for the swim. Their disguises having been discarded and thrown overboard, Carne and Belton clambered over the rails of the gallery and lowered themselves until their feet touched the water. Next moment, they had both let go and were swimming in the direction of Carne's own yacht. It was the period of their adventure that the darkness proved of real service to them. By the time they had swum half a dozen strokes, it would have been needed a sharp pair of eyes to distinguish them as they rose and fell among the foam-crested waves. If, however, the storm had done them good in saving them from notice, it came within an acre of doing them an ill service in another direction. Good swimmers, though both Carne and Belton were, they had proved to each other's satisfaction the seas of almost every known quarter of the globe. They soon found that it took all their strength to make headway now. By the time they reached their own craft, they were both completely exhausted. As Belton declared afterwards, he felt as if he could not have managed another 20 strokes, even had his life depended on it. At last, however, they reached the yacht's stern and clutched the rope ladder which Carne had himself placed there before he had set out on the evening's excursion. In less time than it takes to tell, he had mounted it and gained the deck, followed by his faithful servant. They presented a sorry spectacle as they stood side by side on the raft rail, the water dripping from their clothes and pattering on the deck. "Thank goodness we're here at last," said Carne, as he soon had recovered his breath sufficiently to speak. "Now slip off your belt and hang it over this cleat with mine." Belton did as he was directed, then followed his master to the saloon companion ladder. Once below, they changed their clothes as quickly as possible, and having donned mackintoshes, returned to the deck, where it was still raining hard. "Now," said Carne, "for the last and most important part of our evening's work. Let us hope the lines will prove equal to the demands we are about to make upon them." As he said this, he took the cleat from upon which he had laid one of the belts, and, having detached the line, began to pull it in, Belton following his example with the other. Their hopes that they would prove equal to the confidence placed in them was proved well founded, for in something less than a quarter of an hour, the 6 bags containing the Emperor of Westphalia's magnificent gold plate were lying upon the deck, ready to be carried below and stowed away in the secret place in which Carne had arranged to hide his treasure. "Now, Belton," said Carne as he pushed the panel back into its place and pressed the spring that locked it, "I hope you're satisfied with what we've done. We've made a splendid haul, and you shall have your share of it. In the meantime, just get me to bed as quickly as you can, for I'm dead tired. And when you've done so, be off on your own. Tomorrow morning you will have to go up to town to arrange the bank authorities about my account." Belton did as he was ordered, and half an hour later his master was safely in bed and asleep. It was late next morning when he woke. He had scarcely breakfasted before the Earl of Amberley and Lord Orpington made their appearance on the north side. To carry out the part he had arranged to play, he received them seated in his deck chair, his swaddled right foot reclining on a cushion before him. Seeing his guests, he made as if he would rise, but they begged him to remain seated. "I hope your ankle is doing better this morning," said Worthington politely as he took a chair beside his friend. "Much better, thank you," Carne replied. "It was not nearly so serious as that I feared, and I hope to be able to hobble about this afternoon. Tell me news, if there's any." "You mean to say you've not heard the great news?" said Lord Amberley, in a tone of astonishment. "I've heard nothing," Carne replied. "Remember, I've not been ashore this morning, and I've been busily engaged with preparations for my departure tomorrow, and I've not had time to look at my papers. Pray, what is the news which you speak with such bated breaths?" "Listen, and I tell you," said Lord Orpington. "As you're aware, last night His Imperial Majesty the Emperor of Westphalia dined ashore, taking with him his aide-de-camp, Count von Walbeck. They had both not been gone from the lodge before than half an hour when, to all intents and purposes, they reappeared, and the Emperor, who seemed much perturbed about something, gave the order to return to the yacht with all possible speed. It was very dark and raining hard at the time, and whoever the men may have been who did the thing, they were, at rate, past masters in the art of disguise. Reaching the yacht, their arrival gave rise to no suspicion, and the officers accused, as for the officers are accustomed, as you know, to His Majesty's rapid comings and goings. The first lieutenant met him at the gangway and declares he had no sort of doubt that it was his sovereign. Face, voice, and manner were perfectly alike. From His Majesty's behavior, he surmised that there had been some sort of trouble brewing for somebody, and if it were to carry this impression still further, the Emperor bade him to send the chief steward to him at once, and at that same time place a sentry who had hitherto been guarding the treasure chamber at the end of the great saloon. Its instructions to allow no one to pass it, on any pretext whatsoever, until the chief steward had been examined, and the Emperor himself gave permission, and then he went below to his cabin. Soon after this, the steward arrived and was admitted. Something seems to have excited the later's suspicions, however, as he was about to give alarm when he was seized from behind and thrown onto the floor, and afterwards gagged and bound. It soon became apparent what object the rascals had in view. They had caused the sentry to be at the door of the treasure chamber to be removed and placed where not only could he not hinder them at their work, but would prevent them from being disturbed. Having obtained the key from the room for the steward in his pocket, they set off to the cabin, ransacked it completely, and stole all the heaviest and most valuable of the Majesty's wonderful plate from the safe. "Good gracious," said Carne, "I never heard of such a thing. Surely it's the most impudent robbery that has ever taken place in the past few years. To represent the Emperor of Westphalia and his aide-de-camp so closely that they should deceive even his own officers on his yacht, and to take a sentry off one post and place him in such a position to protect them while they were doing their own nefarious work, seems to me like the height of audacity. But how did they gain the booty themselves and away? Gold plate under the most favorable circumstances is no means an easy thing to carry." As he asked this question, Carne lit another cigarette, hands steady as a rock. "They must have escaped in the boat that it was supposed was lying under the shelter of the stern gallery," replied Lord Amberley. The chief steward, unable to furnish the police with no clue to their identity." "None whatsoever," replied Orpington. "He opens to believe, however, that they were Frenchmen. One of them, the man impersonated the Emperor, seems to have uttered an exclamation in that tongue." "And when was the robbery discovered?" "Only when the real Emperor returned to the vessel shortly after midnight. There was no launch to meet him, and he had to get Tremorden to take him off. You can easily imagine the surprise his arrival occasioned. It was intensified when they went below to find His Majesty's chamber turned upside down, and the chief steward lying bound and gagged on the sofa, and all was most valuable of the plate was gone missing." "What an extraordinary story!" "And having now told you the news with which the place is ringing, we must be off on our route of business," said Orpington. "It is quite certain you are going to leave us tomorrow?" "Quite, I'm sorry to say," answered Carne. "I'm going to ask as many of my friends as possible to do me the honour of lunching with me at 1 o'clock, and at 5 I shall weigh anchor and bid England goodbye. I shall have the pleasure of your company, I hope.
I shall have much pleasure, said Orpington.
And I also, said Aunt Billy. And goodbye for present. It's just possible I may see you again during the afternoon. Luncheon next day was as brilliant a social gathering as the most fastidious in such matters could have desired. Everyone in the Coes who had any claim to distinction was present, and several had undertaken the journey from town in order to say farewell to one who had made himself so popular during his brief stay in England. When Carne rose to reply to the toasts of the South proposed by the Prime Minister, it was observable that he was genuinely moved, as, indeed, most were his hearers. For the remainder of the afternoon, the yacht's deck was crowded with his friends, all of whom expressed their hope that it might not be very long he was amongst them once more. To the kind speeches Carne invariably offered a smiling reply. I also trust it will not be long, he answered. I have enjoyed my visit immensely, and you may be very sure I shall never forget you as long as I live. An hour later, the anchor was weighed, and his yacht was steaming out of the harbor. And amid a sense of intense enthusiasm, as the Prime Minister had that afternoon informed him, in public interest, the excitement of his departure was dividing honors with the burglary of the Emperor of Westphalia's gold plate. Carne stood beside his captain on the bridge, watching the little fleet of yachts until his eyes could no longer distinguish them. Then he turned to Belton, who had just joined him, and placed his hand upon his shoulder. So much for our life in England, Belton, my friend. It has been a glorious fun, and no one can deny that, from a business point of view, it was extremely satisfactory. You, at least, should have no regrets. None whatsoever, said Belton, but I must confess I should like to know what they will say when the truth comes out. Carne smiled sweetly as he answered, I think they'll say that. All things considered, I have won the rights to call myself the Prince of Swindlers.
Woo! Finished it. Okay. I can't remember if I put the cats on my closest review. Which get stream. Oh, I don't have the cats on here. Dang it. I will fix that.
In the quiet of the evening, where shadows softly play, a fairy tale wolf sheds his skin.
Okay, one cat has left us.
Away,
The other two are
with a
snoring.
twinkle in his eye and a heart full of dreams.
Thank you all for coming
He
tonight.
waits for the Friday
And I
night
hope you enjoyed the stories.
where the magic redeems.
We will have fairy tales tomorrow.
In the
So I
moonlight,
hope you all come back for that too.
he's found
Let's
his
see
true
who might be on that we
reading
can
tales of wonder for one and for
read.
all.
Anyone writing and reading?
In a world of stars dancing, his
He doesn't.
spirit takes flight with
I'm not
stories
seeing any
of
of the writing and
beauty
reading people on usually.
under the starlit night.
Oh, harp's on. Is that the old person?
He picks up a book, the pages worn and wise. Every line
Surprised I didn't have the window open already. Or do I?
under
Oh, Don Quixote.
the vast
Okay.
skies.
Yep.
From far
Let's do some Don Quixote. Okay.
lands
Sorry,
where
that's
the
right.
wild things roam to enchanted forests where the heart finds
Those
home.
are, of course, the red messages.
Oh, the wolf
Lovely
in
Assistant
the
Kelly was posted.
moonlight, he's found his true calm, reading tales of wonder for one
So,
and
let's go ahead and read
for all.
harp.
In a world
Listen to
of
some Don
stars
Quixote.
dancing, his spirit takes
And I will
flight
hopefully see you all tomorrow for some
with
Friday Night Fairy Tales.
stories of beauty
Good night.
under the starlit night. With every word he reads, he casts a spell of peace,
When did Starybot start doing closing messages?
transporting all who
That's cool.
listen to a land where joy won't cease.
Again, we'll see you all tomorrow.